In 2077, they voted my city the worst place to live in America. Main issues: sky-high rate of violence, and more people living below the poverty line than anywhere else. Can't deny it, it's all true. But everybody still wants to live here. This city's always got a promise for you. Might be a lie, an illusion, but it's there, just around the corner, and it keeps you going.
The universe of Cyberpunk is based on our timeline, except with an alternative history and a dystopian future that is heavily focused on tech and cybernetics. Dating back to the 80s, a number of significant events have occurred in history that have led to a collection of altered outcomes, and as a result, the globe has been plagued by famine, trade wars, biological warfare, societal collapse, and eventually the breakdown of governments. In the chaos, a number of major corporations stepped in to fill the positions of power around the world. Technological advances radically multiplied, as they were no longer restricted by governments, which in turn led to hundreds of new, highly questionable inventions. Some of the bigger corporations grew to be larger and more powerful than the countries they call home, and coincidentally, with power comes domination. So over time, what is left of the world's governments are so heavily influenced by the corporations they work with that they may as well not even exist. Because of this, it's led to a number of corporate wars, each one more deadly than the last. The story behind Cyberpunk actually originates from a tabletop game that was created in the 80s and has been developing and growing ever since. So there is almost 40 years of lore backing Cyberpunk 2077. Seriously, I've been reading up on it over the last few days and I've barely scratched the surface. The story behind it is huge. This video is just a quick run through of what we know so far to get a bit of a feel for the setting and preparation for the game release later this year. If there is interest, I'm pretty keen to go through some of the major events in history that have led us to the present time in-game 2077. So let me know in the comments. Otherwise, let's crack into it. The Cyberpunk universe is an alternative reality to Earth, set in the near future, where crime is at an all-time high and death is a common occurrence on the streets. Wealthy corporations are rampant and have become more powerful than the world's governments. And just like a number of countries, the United States too is forced to rely on these large corporations in order to survive. These companies deal in a wide range of sectors, including weapons, robotics, cybernetics, pharmaceuticals, biotechnology, and communications. And many of these companies operate well above the law. The series is set in Night City, a fictional West Coast metropolis situated between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Said to have a population of around 5 million, although this is much likely higher in 2077. Global superpowers have collapsed, leaving Earth's fate at the hands of large corporations that frequently bicker amongst themselves for world dominance. Drought and disease run rampant, and as a result, massive famines have occurred, and the Middle East has become a radioactive desert. Technoshock is a widespread mental disorder, as many people are unable to cope with the synthetic muscle tissue, organic circuits, and designer drugs. With the absence of a government and its military forces, casual violence is becoming a growing epidemic. The world and its people are subjected to ongoing conflicts between rival gangs and its ruling entities, fighting for territories and ultimately control. The internet is regulated continually by these corporations and their army personnel. Homelessness is exceedingly high, but this doesn't mean that the poor are excluded from cybernetic modification. It's just not as safe, effective, and aesthetically pleasing as the more expensive alternatives. As a result of the never-ending threat to life, all citizens are allowed to own and openly carry firearms in public. The Cyberpunk game takes place in Night City, which is located on the west coast of the United States, in the Free State of Northern California. Free states are still part of the Union of the USA, but are now independent. They can declare federal laws as invalid and create their own. The first state to declare itself a free state was Texas in 1999, which was then renamed to the Republic of Texas after the government tried to regulate its weapons. Subsequently, Texas was then followed by Alaska in 2000, California in 2002, Nevada in 2003, and Utah in 2014. Eventually in 2012, Northern California then broke away from the rest of California, becoming the Free State of Northern California, with the remainder turning into the Free State of Southern California. Night City is located just north of the Free State of Southern California, and in real life is the Morro Bay area. Night City's original name was going to be Coronado City, and was the brainchild of businessman Richard Knight, who'd become displeased with his encounters within corporate construction projects as part of his company, Hazley Ferris and Knight. This eventually led him to breaking away and forming his own company, Knight International, with the ultimate goal of creating the perfect city. He envisioned an idyllic utopia in which other cities across the country looked to them as the future gold standard. Shortly after the breakdown, many of the megacorps also looked at creating such a space, where crime and poverty were non-existent, and the freedom to choose their own laws was granted, so as not to impede their sometimes unethical work. By 1992, corporations like Arasaka, IBM, and Petrochem had all invested heavily in Coronado City. Knight purchased many of the rights, as well as the subsequent land surrounding Del Coronado Bay from Petrochem, in order to secure a site for the new city. By 1993, construction of the city was well underway. The bay had been dredged, and the upper peninsula had been extended. Any existing residents of Del Coronado were relocated to new districts, known as Old Downtown and the central hub of the city. Where the corporations were based would be the new downtown area. In 1998, Knight was killed by an organized crime syndicate in retaliation for being kept out of Coronado City's construction. From there onwards, the city's name was changed to Night City in his honor. Following on from his death, several factions fought for control. Local mobsters battled against big corporations, which resulted in anarchy in several sectors, and the police force quickly became ineffective against such groups. By 2005, the mob had total control of the city's infrastructure, and the corporations, who had no desire to govern, retreated back to their corporate strongholds in the suburbs. The period between 2009 and 2011 was known as the Mob Wars, and Night City had grown to be an incredibly violent, murderous, and highly active gang metropolis. It's unclear whether the megacorps attempted to deal with the mob during this time, but it is well known that the mob was bad business for the megacorps. Eventually the conflict was resolved when heavily armed Arasaka paramilitaries brought in by the megacorps took to the streets in force and overwhelmed the mobsters, in turn leaving them effectively defeated. Thereafterwards, the corporations installed puppets into local government in positions of influence and began the process of cleaning up the war-torn city. The city's homelessness had by now grown out of control, and new laws had come into effect, stating that anyone without the finances to renovate their home would be removed. By now, almost all of the city's affordable housing was occupied by corps troops, resulting in the displacement of hundreds of residents. By the year 2020, the mob wars were a distant memory, and Night City had become a relatively peaceful place, with the downtown district being continually policed at all times. However, many dangers still remained, and the scars of previous conflicts have not yet healed. Weapons are prevalent in everyone's day-to-day lives, and it's not uncommon to see a gun as often as you'd see a cell phone. The Cyberpunk 2077 story goes on to follow a mercenary outlaw who goes by the name of V. V is a hired gun on the rise in Night City, the most violent and dangerous metropolis of the corporate-ruled future, going after a one-of-a-kind implant that is the key to immortality. I'll be the first to admit I wasn't particularly excited for this game. It seemed a little overhyped, and I've been burned enough times from clever marketing to fall for another one. But after really digging in to see what I could find, I must say, I'm very interested to see what comes from this. The depth of the lore alone has pulled me right in. As I said earlier, this was really just meant as a summary of what we currently know about the setting of the game. There are so many things I could talk about regarding megacorporations and the events in the past that has led to the cyberpunk world to the state it's currently at. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to add me on all the socials, links in the description. Cheers!